Right, before we start, any questions on yesterday then? Any big doubt we haven't resolved? Nothing? Everything unclear? Everything clear? Somewhere in between? Okay. Then I think we'll just start now with you can still hear me, but I think they won't be from your phone or something. You have been muted by your university. One. One. Right, well, we are talking about the technology. We may as well start a little bit. What this lecture is all about, this in the afternoon, is really simplifying techniques for analysis. Now, obviously, if you go to certain labs, they can do LCMS and QTOF and who knows what. The question is, for me, always, what do you want it to be? If there is something where you need it present, let's do it. If it's a novel plant, where there is little information and you really want to understand its chemistry, we now have tools in hand. It's absolutely brilliant. If you, at the same time, try to work with rock-solid, normal, widely used plants, you need something simple which people can use. So that's why the strategy you'll see today combines something which is a recently advanced LCMS-based profiling, in some cases, in other cases, NMR-based profiling, with a very simple technique. Having said that, simplicity is good in the sense that it is what's, for example, more and more accepted in pharmacopoeia. The Chinese pharmacopoeia has systematically gone by HPLC. And I think there are very good reasons for this. They can really use this throughout the country and at various levels. So that's what I'm trying to do. The other thing which comes out of this lecture is really that on the one hand we deal with natural complexity, and at the same time we deal with what people are doing on purpose or accidentally in terms of mostly reducing the quality. Sometimes they claim they improve it or they augment it. That's not necessarily the case. So, the lecture today, after the type I'd sent to you, Monish, I sort of redrafted it from simplicity to complexity, or simplicity and complexity, just to highlight this. Right, I think we'll just start and we'll see what happens. So, this is what I'm covering in terms of content. One of the things which will come back to us is the paper you looked at yesterday, which is talking about the abstract you have already prepared, and I'll give you some of the details which you didn't have at the time. And then I'm also looking at some of the more recent things. I talked about this, so I'm not going to dwell a lot on the whole issue of the global sustainable development goals. But good health and well-being, goal number 3, is really the crucial one here, but also sustainable use of resources as an absolutely essential one. Now, if you think about these things, one of the core points is that the sustainable development goals are not really made for health. They're global goals. So we need to think very specifically also what are we globally trying to achieve in the context of better healthcare. And here the Astana Declaration from 2018, last year, on primary healthcare comes in very important. And I think this is a crucial argument also in the Indian context to highlight that primary healthcare, we will apply knowledge, including scientific as well as traditional knowledge. So the Astana Declaration recognizes traditional knowledge as an important element of providing healthcare. To strengthen primary healthcare, improve health outcomes, and to ensure access for all people to the right care at the right time and at the most appropriate level of care, respecting their rights, needs, dignity, and autonomy. I think that's maybe not very important in India because you are ahead of the game. You have the Department of Ayush, which is doing exactly this. For us in the UK and for me, this is a very important argument because I say, look, you're ignoring an important part. Maybe you don't want to call it traditional medicine. But I think we need to think about other non-standard forms of healthcare. So this is really crucial. So it continues that we support broadening and extending access to a range of healthcare services through the use of high-quality, safe, effective, and affordable medicines, as appropriate traditional medicines, vaccines, and diagnostics and other technologies. So vaccines sit next to traditional medicine, or medicine next to traditional medicine next to vaccines. I think it's a very important and interesting declaration in our context. So, that's a great aspiration. Sounds wonderful. And what we are coming to now then highlights, I think, some of the basic issues. Because it does say effective and affordable medicines which are of high quality and safe. And I think where we are currently falling short are in the first 2 points, high quality and safety. We are not falling short because traditional medicines are not in many cases intrinsically safe. Many are. We had a discussion about Aristolochia and all these that's ongoing, but many of the things which are being used are intrinsically safe. But what's being used commercially is not necessarily safe. So the reality is that the current situation, if you talk about traditional medicine, what is traditional medicine? Nobody can tell me that your department of Ayush is actually dealing with traditional medicine. It's dealing with a very modern practice, which is derived from traditional roots. But it's a very modern interpretation. What's the last letter of Ayush? It's H. Right, wonderful. So I'm wired up now, and I hope you can still hear me. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Right, the last letter of Ayush is homeopathy. With all due respect, that's a relatively recent introduction to India. Another one is Unani. an introduction which came via Muslim migration. So we have a constant exchange and improvement of knowledge, and this is wonderful. But this fast change today is completely different. Today we are struggling with a lack of recognition of these medical traditions. They are something called tribal medicines, which sounds sort of like backward medicine. Yeah? They are linked to claims that they are not effective, that they cannot demonstrate effectiveness. And all these are big challenges. So we have the knowledge, but we need to think about research on making them more evidence-based. And that's why I'm saying we need these simple tools. Now, we didn't have a chance to compile and analyze your response, but I did bring here some of the one-line or one-sentence definitions from other colleagues in the area of ethnopharmacology. Remember, the very first thing you did, you wrote a one-sentence definition. These are some of the answers I got when I asked the same questions of a range of colleagues. The first one is a medical doctor from Switzerland. And he gave a very simple and clear definition. What I want to highlight here, it's the study of the drugs or poisons used by other people. So if you study your own tradition, it's not really ethnopharmacology, which is sort of implied in, yeah? But I think it really describes the reality. The other one is by two biologists, Irmi Arenas and Roberto Bay from Mexico. And they look at a much more ecology-oriented definition. It's the interaction and relationship between humans and biological organisms along with their bioactive constituents that promote the well-being of humans over social and geographic spaces. So we're talking about spaces, which I think is a very interesting way of looking at it. But again, it has a very specific focus. Graham Jones, a very nice phytochemist, not a pharmacologist or anything, he came up with my favorite one in many ways. It constitutes a respectful marriage between modern science and ancient wisdom, with much to be gained in both directions. So maybe you should have a big Hindu ritual marrying ethno and pharmacology somehow. That would certainly be a wonderful party. Some other one, that's my definition, Anna Jäger's. What I want to highlight here is what I said earlier. In my case, very much a focus on better and safer use of these medicines. And then Anna Jäger highlights something else. It's a very strange word. Actually, the word makes very little sense if you think about it. Ethnopharmacology basically means that it's the ethnographic study of pharmacology. If you think about it in what it really means. But obviously what we are using it for is in a very different way. So that's by means of introduction into today's day. And if you think about it, you can sort of define four main areas we need to focus on. One is related to the knowledge and practice on the use of herbal medicines. That's something which to some degree we covered on the first page. So that's here at the bottom. The other one is the whole issue of activity, claims on efficacy, so clinical and pharmacological as well as toxicological research. The other two are then here. One is the quality, variability, and safety. And the other one is the sustainable sourcing, including benefits associated with it. Now, you will say there are other topics which need to be covered, but I think as a big picture, in order to structure our thinking, it's very useful. The first one we are looking at is sustainable sourcing. So the one here on the left-hand side. Sustainable sourcing is something which has been in the debate for quite some time. It's very interesting. It was more driven by industrial partners and not by academics. We as academics have not really given it too much thought. It is one area where I think there needs to be much more research conducted than what we are doing now, right now. Now, if we think about sustainable sourcing, I need to introduce something else, and that's again something we picked up before. What is the final product? This is a very much a UK-based perspective on the food-medicine interface. What is the food-medicine interface? The food-medicine interface is an understanding of the complexity between something which is strictly a food and something which is strictly a medicine. So if you take rice, leaving aside red rice, etc., it's in essence a staple food. It has health benefits, it's nutritious, and if appropriately prepared, it has health benefits. But basically, it's a food without any specific claims. Then you move into health foods, or healthier foods, into functional foods. Tomato extract is a good example, soybean extract, etc. So these are all good examples. And then you move into a more medically oriented. Ginkgo for us is an unregulated food supplement. If you were to give this presentation in Switzerland, they would be screaming and yelling at me because it clearly is a medicine. It belongs here, in over-the-counter medicine. So we have different interpretations. And then we have prescription drugs, codeine, morphine, being pure compounds, but also senosides or senna extracts, etc. Now, why is this interesting and useful? It's interesting and useful because it helps us to understand what is the place of certain substances in a certain medical system. I gave you the example of ginkgo, which in the UK is an unregulated food supplement, and in other countries is a licensed medicine. That's a different interpretation of the existing evidence. Now, it has not been asked until we got started to work on it, what implication does this have for the supply of materials onto the market? If I have a highly regulated market and I import ginkgo leaves for use as a medicine, it will be different from it being a food supplement. So these are some Guji seeds, and with this we are starting on questions about sustainable supply. Food supplements pose some key questions. A food supplement is very different in a legal definition from a medicine. What is the basic requirement of a food? It must contain what's on the label. If you say, this is 1 bag of black beans, 1 kilogram of black beans, and 10% of these beans are red, there is an adulteration. There is something which is wrong. It may be functionally completely unimportant, but it's not what it should be. That's all food claims relate to. The composition. So the botanical authenticity is what is needed. There are other issues which are not addressed automatically, but which are important. Sustainable sourcing. Something very important in this context, but very often neglected. And then the recognition of traditional knowledge. We mentioned neem tree on the first day, and the attempts to get patents out of traditional Indian knowledge. So the recognition of this is something very important. And then, as I said, we need to look at the phytochemical composition and variability. Then you want to make a health claim for it. What is an appropriate health claim for a food supplement? Now, the Indian regulation, which I don't know, will be different from the European. In Europe, including the UK, it's very clear it can only be a preventive health claim. Maintains a healthy heart, whatever that means. And it must be evidence-based, which makes it very difficult to actually get these claims on a product. So there are very specific requirements for food health claims. Now, I'm moving to a few things about China. This is an event I went to, I think 2 years ago, or 2017. It was a celebration of the University of Chinese Medicine. I think 50 or 40 years, I forgot which one of the two. But on top you see the tremendous power and strength from a Chinese perspective. And I've picked up this quote from this day. TCM is the representation of China's splendid culture. Now you are doing something similar. You're using Ayush in a political context. Ayush is the representation of India's splendid culture, which is fine. I'm not arguing this, but it's not fine if you don't maintain scientific standards and say that's what it is and that's what's good about specific practice and that's what's bad. So you still need a rigorous assessment of it. These are some of the big TCM markets. I'll come back to them of these things, and this is one of the TCM factories that we visited there. Now, the example I brought with you is this plant. This is a plant, and you'll be puzzled by some of the pictures on the left-hand side, because it doesn't look very Chinese, nor is it very Chinese. This is a picture of maca. The ones here in the front part are all maca. Maca is a plant, and I'll come to this in more detail, which originally comes from Peru and neighboring countries in South America. It is used there basically as a food with the idea that it helps in case of high altitude problems. Not sickness, but problems. The Chinese got on the case and they decided it's a wonderful thing to treat all sorts of problems related to blood circulation. We'll come back to this. So the final picture I just want to show you, this is in one city in China, the main entrance to a TCM market. And what you see here on the screen is the spot price for Chinese medicines. With this I just want to highlight what sort of tremendous business it is. And one of these business opportunities has been maca. Maca is, as I said, it's similar in a way to radish. So what they're using is the enlarged hypocotyl, part of the fruit and part of the stem. It has been cultivated in Peru for thousands of years. We know this from archaeological evidence. In the 1990s, the Chinese imported it. It was then advertised as what we in Western Europe would call a superfood. A term I don't endorse, but that's what's being used. And it was also called something like the Peruvian Viagra or the Peruvian ginseng. And that gives away what the Chinese actually were pushing for. It became an aphrodisiac, it became a very popular general mind tonic, etc. It was used for increasing vitality and longevity, enhancing fertility and libido, and alleviating menopausal symptoms in women. I hasten to add, I think there's very little evidence, if any, for most of these claims. But we have this in the background paper to it. Now, Chinese, what you see here is a product originally from a relatively small country in South America, suddenly becoming a global commodity. In this case in China. And the Chinese then started large-scale agricultural production and exploitation. To add to this, in the last 2 years since we finished this work, well, we haven't finished it, there's one paper pending, but what's clear, the hype around maca has gone down quite dramatically. It has gone down simply, I think, because the experience is not what the claims are telling you. So, what are the big challenges here? There are 3 big challenges. One is sustainable sourcing. This is a high mountain plant from the Peruvian Andes. There's no way that the high Andes can sustain exportation into China at a large scale. That's a very simple one. The second thing is, obviously, the Chinese didn't even want to have this as a large-scale production in Peru. They started their own production. And all this was done without any access and benefit sharing agreement. So China now is the major producer of maca without any benefits to Peru. This is part of a tradition where you have a similar pattern and similar problems, but it certainly is something which is highly problematic. And the third thing is we have a very limited understanding of what the benefits are and what the chemical composition of these materials are. Now, if you look at the chemistry, there are some very clear compounds which are relevant. The plant belongs to the Brassicaceae, so you have these typical spicy compounds which you find in Brassica and the like. And some of these are found here, and they are really the main ones responsible for the activity. However, we cannot substantiate, as I said before, most of these health claims. The composition is dubious, and the indigenous knowledge about maca usage has been dragged out of context to fit into the demands of a very different and fast-growing market. Maca is now a Chinese medicine with its own Chinese character, maca, whatever that looks like, and it is not in any way beneficial to the local producers, as I said. And I think this lack of protocols is a key issue. We'll skip these things, because I want to conclude this with really highlighting what is sort of the background challenge. If you think about this framework, what are the consequences for the supply of materials? It cannot be the supply of a high-quality material in a sustainable way. And that's really the problem. And things like the statement here, it's a paper by Taylor Smith 5 years ago, and Eric Brand. We will see adulteration of maca and poor quality maca in the market. The pressure from the Chinese buyers will escalate, and more illegal activity is inevitable. So it tells you what some of these underlying forces are. And we'll look at this in the next example. And then the Andean people are going to have an increasingly difficult time securing maca for food, for their own usage. So much maca is now imported that there's not enough left for the Peruvian population. In the meantime, the price for maca on the global market has collapsed. So after some initial gains by local producers, now the gains are actually very limited. So it's a very paradoxical situation. So let's finally move into quality questions and think about it. And the two examples I've brought is one where you clearly have an agricultural production, that's St. John's work, and the other one is where you have a mixture of agricultural production and the production coming from collecting material in the wild. The previous example was about what the underlying issues are. This then looks at the questions of the specific products as they are available. So what I've shown you is, in a way, how local and traditional uses are suddenly becoming global commodities. Maca from tiny areas in the Andes is suddenly in demand by 1.3 billion Chinese, and who knows how many billion other people globally. That's one of the big challenges we face in this sector. And in order to tackle this, one of the things we have introduced in 2012 is a concept I have had actually sort of growing in my mind for many years, and it comes from sociology and economics, value chains. Now, value chain, in essence, is something where we, as a, let's say, pharmaceutical scientist, would not normally deal with. What it is, it's the understanding of how a product is manufactured, what the benefits are. So, the sequence of activities required to make a finished product from its initial starting material, from a field or crop to the finished product. So, if Tata makes a car or a truck or whatever it is, value chains describe all the steps from the initial Tata steel production, the production of some bulbs and who knows what, to the finished product. That's a very complex value chain. Now, home medicines, when I did my field work, were actually reasonably simple. And that's about as simple as it can get. We had a grower, collector, processor, and healer who was in charge of getting a plant, giving it to the patient, monitoring whether it's used right, and then securing more material if needed. That's the simplest value chain you can think of, two stakeholders. What's important for us to keep in mind, both sides will know very well what the product is, how it looks like, what the quality is, etc. If you go to other types of value chains, this is what I call the local market chain. Here we have somebody who is a local producer. He then sells it to a processor. Let's say somebody outside of or produces something and sells it to someone here in the city. It then goes to a healer or pharmacist or whatever have you, somebody who produces a material, and then to a buyer or patient. It doesn't involve any industrial processing, it's again very simple. There's still some knowledge along the value chains. So these are small or medium-scale productions, very much driven by markets, but mostly local markets. This is an example of one of these. It's from a paper by Linde van Andel. And it shows, in this case, an example from a market in Ghana, Africa. And what it shows you is the complexity which comes in terms of the products which are available. There are hundreds of products here, some of them in huge quantities, others in small quantities, very often stored together. So again, question of cross-contamination, etc. But what is important is a sentence Linde wrote in her paper in 2012. Most people selling herbal medicines were full-time traders who bought their wares from wholesalers and did not gather herbs themselves. As a result, they were generally unaware of the source of the plant material. You're unaware of the source, you're unaware of all other aspects. Quality, sustainable sourcing, potential problems during harvesting, etc. So it's a very interesting one, highlighting what we can actually do in terms of understanding the seller's perspective. This is now, I think, what's becoming rather interesting and complex in terms of some of the current ones. And here we have a situation where a grower or collector from the wild, and there are many of them, they produce primary material, pass it on to a primary processor. This goes to one or many middlemen. There may be a much longer chain here. Part of it is exported, part of it is sold on the national market. Let's say this is turmeric. So you have somebody in the center of India, around whatever, Mumbai, growing turmeric. It's then sold on, etc., etc. And some of this is exported, others is sold nationally. And then in the exporter chain, it finally ends up with the consumer or patient, let's say in the UK. Now, a very simple question to ask. What happens if an exporter or an importer rejects a batch of material which this exporter X or the middleman X wants to send over to the UK? What happens to this batch? If the UK says no, it doesn't comply with our quality standards. The simple answer is we don't really know in many cases what happens. The important point is we need to understand it, because it may be passed on to another exporter who sells it to a different country, or it may up on the UK market. What it is not happening is that there doesn't seem to be any attempt to mitigate against any quality problems one may have identified in this process. So to give you an example problems in quality. This is a very old study, and I'm no way claiming that the methodology is up to date. It's a paper we wrote in 1992, and it's based on some fieldwork in Mexico. The reason why I bring it in is because you can very easily show in a very small value chain of this type, in this case a national one, what the quality issues are. This is the flavonoid content of different batches of chamomile. Now, if you simply look at the flavonoid content, you see it varies from 0.6 to about 2.6. If you now think about what this means in terms of the sourcing, the ones with a high content of the flavonoids are from the central markets. They are from those markets which get the fresh material and then start processing it. The further you go away from the center, the lower the quality gets. So within one national complex set of value chains, you can demonstrate that the quality depends on the distance from the original production. So this was done according to the German pharmacopoeia at the time. So again, the methods are in no way state of the art, but that doesn't matter. Now let's move to the big questions and the methodology. This is a ginkgo leaf, as you will know, and if I tell you these are all the same products, this is all the same, you'll sort of look at me and say, microchemistry is tremendously bad. Obviously, you would be right. These are all products which claim to be ginkgo. They're all finished products from the UK market and the internet claiming to be ginkgo. So you have some which are pretty solid quality and good. You have some which clearly don't contain anything. And you can take some which contain something which has nothing to do with ginkgo. And that's actually quite common. Now we can analyze this in great detail, what each of these cases is. And that's exactly what is the point. Now this is, as you will know, an HPLC chromatogram, which we used at the time to differentiate. It comes from the HPLC Association monographs on chromatograms, in this case for ginkgo. And what is important here, many of these are unregulated products. Now, keep the image in mind a little bit for some of the later ones, but what I would say, what is very stunning is that the variability is tremendous. Now, we can explain many of the problems very well. One is there's a very systematic adulteration with Japanese temple tree. Japanese temple tree is a Sophora species. There are several species, and we think it's Sophora flavescens, but that's another discussion. Now, if you know Sophora and if you know ginkgo, there's no way that you can confuse the two. Why does it happen? How does it happen? It must be an intentional adulteration. Others obviously had rutin added to it as a pure compound or in one way or another. Actually, rutin is a very common or very important constituent of Sophora. Now, what's happening there? Well, the producer of this food supplement did add Sophora because the UV spectrum of Sophora is similar to ginkgo. It obviously doesn't contain the active constituents, which in this case are the ginkgolides, and you don't have any therapeutic benefits from it, but you can trick the analyst. So, and that's where simplicity comes in as a very useful tool. It's because I can do this in a reasonable amount of time. The main challenge was the preparation of the extract, and you see we have a total of 35 samples, and we can distinguish them extremely well with all their chemical complexity. So, bright example. By the way, the Ginkgo project was one which afterwards was streamed on the BBC, and actually the little clip is still available on the BBC website, so you can watch some of the implications in this little clip. Finally, coming to back to Hyperion. Your abstract yesterday, you did a brilliant job in extracting the important information. Now, since you said yesterday it's not a plant you're very familiar with, here a little bit of background information. It is a very important medicinal plant. In most European countries, it's a licensed medicine, meaning it has the same regulatory status as whatever have you, morphine, cardinalites, simvastatin, whatever have you. It is an extract which is being used, and there are some well chemically characterized extracts which are dominating the market. The use is, in essence, for low to medium depression. Now, low to medium depression is, especially if it's medium, something that would be done under the supervision of a medical doctor. In the UK, the regulatory authorities have taken the position that low or medium depression cannot be something which can be used for an OTC product. They don't want this to be a licensed medicine, so there it's only available as an over-the-counter medicine for so-called low mood. I'm always struggling to understand what the heck low mood is. You know, my coffee was too hot in the morning, and I'm grumpy because, I drank my tongue. Low mood doesn't mean anything, but that's what the definition of the regulator is. As a consequence, we have regulated products under a specific licensing scheme in Europe on the market. It's a European Directive on Herbal Medicines, which resulted in the symbol, the traditional herbal registration. And we have unregulated products on the market which are food supplements. The active constituents are these two. There are classes of compounds. These are hypophorins, and these are the hypericines. Naphthalene, the latter, and they are really the quality markers of these products. So I said that a moment ago, the type of products we have and what their regulatory status is. Now, there are numerous analytical tools. We wrote a paper in 2017 looking at the available analytical tools at the time. And we identified about 50 HPLC methods alone for St. John's Wort as a quality control tool. In most cases, they focused only on hypericines, which is the first one. The bottom one, and far fewer included this one as an analytical tool. Now, we also have HPLC methods, and we have validated methods in the US Pharmacopoeia, European Pharmacopoeia, etc. We also have NIR as a method, and DNR barcoding wasn't really at that time too well developed for this purpose. Now, this is the same analytical approach as I showed you last time for about 50 St. John's Wort finished products. The two key messages, comparing it to the Ginkgo one, there's actually quite a large group of products which are reasonably homogeneous. This part here, here are some controls, but from here onwards, it's pretty consistent. And then things become odd, and there are more and more which are problematic. It's utterly unsurprising if I tell you that these are mostly the regulated products, one way or another. And here are unregulated food supplements, very often with all sorts of problems. And the problems we'll be looking at. It's an HPLC chromatogram, as you will see, and one of the standard methods again available, so there was no method development associated with it. That's the summary. So about half, a bit more than half, actually comply with the basic requirements in this case of the USP, United States Pharmacopoeia. And then we had a whole series of products which, for some reason or another, were different from what we would expect based on the pharmacopoeia standards. And now what we are going to do is we're using these unusual samples and try to understand what is going on there. One thing we identified as a very problematic case is we found 8 samples which contain food dyes, synthetic food dyes. They have nothing to do with a St. John's product, but they were added again simply to trick the pharmaceutical analysis. It's a very good way to mimic the UV spectrum of hyperacine. If you mix them right, you get a very good UV spectrum which looks identical to hyperion. So it is simple adulteration. Now, obviously, all these products always come from an Asian country like India or China. Wrong. All these products came from a country called the United States, indicating the problems you have with regulation in the United States. I don't want to dwell too much on the whole synthetic dyes issue. I don't want to be the health police, but it's important to keep it in mind. Let's get more into the details. This is the NMR-based analysis, and I want to use this slide to introduce what other tool we have used. So tool number 1 has been the HPLC, and I trust many of you know what it is. NMR-based metabolomics is an approach where I try to simplify the very complex chemical nature of an extract and then do a comparative analysis. This comparative analysis is done using SIMCA, a SIMCA plot, and you do what is called hoteling. You see this elliptic thing here, and this is basically the most similar products. And what you see, some cluster in a certain way. Okay, we lost the pointer. So you have some which are very consistent. The yellow ones are licensed or registered medicines on the right-hand side, and then you have others which are Chinese materials, so-called, so they come from China. These are the green ones, etc. Can we get a new battery in here or something? I don't know what it is, but it doesn't want to point anymore. Right. Wants a new battery. Okay, I'll just continue here for the time being. Can you still hear me? So, one of the things what I've showed you up to now is the material, which is the finished product. So the other big question then is, what is the situation with regards to finished products versus the starting materials? And here fine science comes in, real science. And that's the abstract you have seen, and great, thank you. The abstract you have seen and the paper behind it. Now, plants have the great characteristic of being rather variable. Botanists have the wonderful idea of putting this variability into certain boxes. They are called species, subspecies, etc. In case of Hypericum pepperatum, we recognize 4 so-called subspecies. One is called Veronense, which is a very widely distributed one. The map is not too easy to see that, but that's basically the whole southern Europe. And this is the eastern part of it, so that's all one subspecies. The other one is called Peperacum. This little area here is the UK, and here you have Central Europe, and here the southern region. It's a species which is also very, very widely introduced. You find in Australia as a weed, in South America, North America, etc. A very unusual one and rare one, as you can see here, is Songaricum, which you basically find in the far extreme southeast of Europe and in Western Asia. So Russian Federation and some of the states to the south of this, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, etc. And it sort of spreads a little bit into China. And then we have the final one, and that's obviously a Chinese species, subspecies chinensis, as the name gives away. Now, you can argue forever whether these four subspecies are real or not, but there is a certain morphological variation. The question you have to ask yourself now is, we've seen lots of differences in the finished products. Are they actually linked to the primary material? So we started out on a very large project with the help of colleagues, collecting samples from Australia, Chile, Argentina, Spain, Portugal, UK, Germany, and adjacent countries, Italy, Greece, and then going further on, this is Kazakhstan and this is China. We looked at the NMR-based variability, and what you see there is we collected these samples. Blue is Mediterranean, green is China, and the others are mostly Northern European, but also the materials from Argentina and Australia. And what this tells you is, well, maybe some of the Maybe some of the Mediterraneans are a little bit different, but there's no clear pattern. I can't really correlate the origin with the Prisma plot here. They all are similar. So from our chemical data, you cannot substantiate that these are products, that these are plant materials which are in any way very, very different. So they're heterogeneous, but we cannot identify the region of origin. Our initial idea was, is there a simple way to say, yes, this is Chinese Hyperion, yes or no? And the answer is we cannot do this. Now, one of the interesting points here is that it was always argued that Chinese Hypericum had a very specific marker. In the HPLC chromatogram, it is something at 0.48. So at 0.48, there is a yellow band which you see here, and this is the Chinese material. And this was claimed to be typical for Chinese and Jonesboro. This was the wisdom at the time. Our answer is wrong. Here you see some of the Spanish materials, and you see slightly weaker, but you see this band. So the so-called Chinese band also shows up in some materials from other regions. There is another band down here which we also need to look at, and again, it's not characteristic for St. John's. So, contrary to previous belief, what we have shown in the paper you have looked at is that, in fact, the Chinese material cannot be distinguished chromatographically using HPLC in a straightforward way from other materials. Now, this has always been linked to one specific compound called avicularine. It's this thing here, a very simple quercetin glycoside, and this quercetin glycoside, if you then look at the NMR spectrum, has some very characteristic signals. In this case, here around 5. This is a very typical signal, and then here, further up, one above 7. So we obtained pure avicularine, and we also obtained another compound which was implicated, which is called guaiavarine, which you see on the right-hand side. In fact, in chemical terms, it's very similar. Most importantly, it's also quercetin glycoside. So, whether it's an arabinofuranose or an pyranoside, it doesn't really matter from my point of view in terms of the pharmacology. But we were basically able to understand the composition in sufficient detail to say that you find, in fact, not either avicularine or guaiavarine in these samples, but you may find both. This is the result in a nutshell. And as I said, this was possible by, in this case, using NMR analysis. So these are the pure compounds, and here you then see the samples. So the ones on the bottom are the two compounds again. Blue is avicularine with a signal I mentioned just below 5, and you see the signal in these samples here, sometimes stronger, sometimes weaker. So one is from Spain and the other one is from China. So what we conclude from this is that the band at 0.48 is in fact the flavonoid glycoside. Now my question to you is, does this have any therapeutic relevance? I see a few people disagreeing with the idea, and yes, you're right. It's not pharmacologically relevant because it's simply a flavonoid, and whether it's quercetin glycoside 1 or 2 or 3 doesn't matter. So, I think we can put to rest the basic argument that Chinese St. John's wort is not as good as, let's say, Southern European. But we are talking here also, thinking about methodology. What I hope I've shown you, we've used a series of methods. We started out with HPTLC, saw some characteristic things. This raised a certain series of questions. We went into NMR, including NMR metabolomics. And then we went into some very specific analysis of some of these compounds. So, we were then able to do this. Now, the final and big point here is we are doing all this with the idea behind of understanding the finished product and what gets onto the market. If you run an analysis of the extracts from the plants, compare it with the finished products, that's what you get. This is the HPTLC, the NMR PCA plot of the combination of the marketed product, the finished products, and the raw materials. And the really interesting outcome of this is there's quite a bit of variability, which you can explain in a certain way, but it's pretty undramatic. And the main variation comes in the production process. Now, this is very different from what many of us, both academics, but also the general population think. They always tell you it's very important how you grow a plant, where you grow it. Yes, it is important. But with what I discussed in the last hour or so, it is clear that the major variability comes in during the production process, and that's what we need to understand. That's what I just said. And then, obviously, what you need to understand then is the value chains of these products, and that's something we haven't done yet. One of the biggest problems with this research is you get great support from companies which sell licensed products. Anyone who sells rubbish will not tell you what they do. That makes perfect sense. But so understanding what goes wrong in this whole system is a very problematic topic to address. Now, that's one example where I hope I've shown you it's not just about detecting problems, but really understanding scientifically what you need to do in order to have high quality products. The second example is in terms of the methodology, very similar. It's again a combination of NMR and HPLC. In this case, it's about rhodiola. Rhodiola grows not too far from you here in the Himalaya, and it has become a very popular product globally as a so-called adaptogen. Adaptogens is a very funny and strange concept. It in fact refers to something which helps the body to adapt to stress. The concept goes back, oddly enough, to a country called the Soviet Union. The idea at the time was that it was the part of the big debate about the genetics arguing that diseases are caused by gene defects, which was not acceptable in the communist ideology. So they came up with a scientific concept to show that it's the environment which does something. And that we, the communist state, the Soviet Union, can create something to treat this stress. And this brought products like Siberian ginseng, like rhodiola, onto the market. First in the Eastern Bloc, later also in Europe. It's rather odd if you think where the concept comes from and how we use it today. So it's a pretty paradoxical thing. But it's accepted in Europe in the treatment of stress-induced fatigue, exhaustion, anxiety, and widely used in many countries also as a sports supplement. Sports supplement is quite interesting. When we started this project, there was an interesting and problematic challenge with the whales. I think it was rugby. I could be wrong, it might have been cricket, but it doesn't matter. One of those very Anglophile sports, which I don't understand too well. So I think it was the Welsh rugby team where they found a high level of unacceptable steroidal supplements. And they claim they only have taken rhodiola products. So they may have taken unregulated, adulterated products, but we never got were able to lay our hands on this product. But it's an interesting example where people may be taking something and afterwards it's very different in terms of what they actually took. Right. Yeah. We talked about the distribution and it being very important, very close to us here. So here's the southern Himalaya, and you see rhodiola rosea is found in this part of the Himalaya, goes down into Myanmar, etc. You find it very widely in northern parts of Russia. You find it in Scotland, the Pyrenees, the Alps, and then along the eastern coast of America, right into Mexico. So it has a huge spread in geographical terms. What is important in the future of the discussion, there are several other species, especially in this Himalaya region, and we've put some here. So, for example, the blue one is Rhodiola crenulata. And there are all sorts of other species which are found in this region. To make life more complicated, not every rhodiola product which is accepted by the competent authorities in the area of pharmacy are the same. This is a summary of the various pharmacopoeias, going from the Australian to the Russian. And what you see here, that nearly all accept only Rhodiola rosea, and in most cases something like the root rhizome, as an active pharmaceutical ingredient. And some of them are dry extracts, others simply defined as extract. But very importantly, the Chinese do not accept Rhodiola rosea, they only accept Rhodiola crenulata. Now think about the things we were discussing before. What sort of a challenge this introduces into the market? Two different regulatory concepts. One only accepts Rhodiola rosea, the other one only accepts crenulata. Both come from the same region. Both are harvested in parallel. They grow basically in the same environment. So you definitely have a risk of adulteration and confusion. The other big thing, and I'm not going to claim that I can read any of these things properly, but Hongjingjiang is the name for Rhodiola rosea. And then you have rather similar names for the various other ones, which are Jiangjiang with a certain variation. So you have all sorts of species which can be that can be confused. So we again looked at a series of products, and this is some of the results which you see here. And what you can see here are these differences that actually we find differences between the species. Sorry, let me go back one. We looked at the finished products to start with, and the finished products again resulted in about a quarter being problematic in terms of the composition not being what it claimed to be. Now, some of them are quite easy to find out. In other cases, a high dose of wild source Siberian rhodiola, and we found it's in fact 5-hydroxytryptophan as the only constituent we could find in this preparation. This is neither a natural substance nor found in rhodiola, nor in any way acceptable as a supplement or a food. It is in there as a cheap adulterant. It's very funny, and actually, no, it's very sad. If you would go back to the first example I gave you on ginkgo, our sample number 7 there only contained 5-hydroxytryptophan, not ginkgo. Both are from the same company. So it does tell you that obviously there something very systematic was in the indiscriminate. But then we have these examples here. And these are examples where you can, in essence, show these are examples where, in essence, you can show you that you have a systematic confusion. They call it confusion of adulteration between the two rhodiola species. And this is what I'm showing you here. This is a very simple NMR-based analysis. And you can see this is Rhodiola rosea. It clusters quite nicely. This green one is Crenulata. And then we have some other species which cluster with Crenulata and a few which are separate. Now we only have one example of this species, Sahalinensis, but sometimes taxonomists class Rhodiola rosea and Sahalinensis as one species. Our chemical data would indicate that potentially this is not the case, but based on the simple accession, we can't draw any definite conclusions. What's good about this is you can very clearly separate the species we are looking at using a very simple approach, using NMR-based metabolomics and PCA. But you can show something else, and this is an interesting one. They're basically the same, but this is the 2D version of it. And if you look here, these are the good Rhodiola crenulata samples. These are the good Rhodiola rosea samples. These are the samples which are sold as Rhodiola rosea, but by the look of it, are mixtures of both. So what in fact happens along the value chain is that you get a mixing of products because it's then difficult to distinguish. And that's something which is quite easily possible And I've explained before the essential basis to this is that the material is collected in the same region, and obviously there's very limited traceability. So we have all the HPTLC data, and here we have some of the problem once again. So I'm not going to go into all the details here in terms of what the outliers are. These are the commercial samples, and as I said before, we have evidence for, in some cases, confusion, in other cases, systematic adulteration. Now, this is the third example, and they're all sort of similar. In all the studies we conducted, we found that between 20 and 60% of the unregulated samples were not what they claimed to be, either adulterated or some sort of confusion. My question to you is, what do you know about India? What do you know about ashwagandha on the market? What do you know about turmeric on the sample, etc., on the market? So, products which have some sort of regulation, in our case the THR, are normally of good quality, and we did not identify any problems, as it should be. In this case, the key problem is the confusion between two closely related species, Crenellata and Rosea. And I think it does highlight these problems of unregulated products again. Now, if you think about this in what I've done in the last hour and a bit or so, what you really need to understand now is what are these challenges and how can we, in the long term, overcome them. On the right-hand side in yellow, you see the problems which we have identified in a sort of generic value chain, where we basically have 5 main groups. The initial cultivation and collection, the primary processing, the manufacturing, the retail, and the consumer. One initially is that obviously we may have problems with a lack of botanical knowledge. We have a misidentification of species. We may have also problems with being unable to harvest sufficient material at the right time and therefore trying to manipulate the material. Then we have, in the primary processing, one of the big challenges is that we obviously get many batches from different suppliers. How is this managed? What quality control is in place or is not in place? So poor controls are a big challenge there. Manufacturing, similar issues, lack of standard operating procedures, lack of finished product assessment. The retail sector, similarly, lack of appropriate controls, and all along, including the consumer, a lack of an understanding of these challenges. And that's certainly if you come up with some sort of a regulatory scheme which can be prevented or mitigated extremely well. So, as a final point, I just want to highlight our latest proposal, and maybe there also is an option for some collaboration or some thinking about. One of the key points I've made in this presentation is traceability. That in fact we are not doing too well in having well-documented traceability through these value chains. We don't know where things come from. Some sectors of the food industry are obviously extremely good now in traceability. You can get high-quality French wine from one specific area, and it's traceable back, and if they don't do what they claim to do, the company would be in trouble. The same is true with high-quality food products, with artistic materials, not obviously for consumption as a food, but so there are mechanisms. I think that's something we need to explore in this whole sector. One of the ways to do this is blockchain technologies. Now, again, I'm venturing into areas I know nothing about. I always class myself as a technophobe who can just handle the basics, but we are suddenly finding ourselves in territories where there's a lot of, I think, exciting opportunities. The blockchain concept, as most of you will know, comes from the IT trade in Bitcoin and related sort of values, currencies. It's a, technically speaking, a decentralized, cryptographically enhanced digital ledger. Instead of writing it down, you have it recorded electronically, and this ledger is decentralized on several computers. And it records transactions among stakeholders. So it's, in a way, in a simpler way, a digital form of digital bookkeeping. And I think that's an interesting and exciting opportunity to think about key challenges in herbal medicine supply. Quality, authenticity, sustainability of the supply, equitable benefit sharing, and thus ultimately all the aspects of sustainability can be documented in such a blockchain ledger system. So our task as the scientists on the pharmaceutical side is to define the content we need in this blockchain. And one of the interesting things is you can actually do today something very simple. You can document the initial quality of the material on the field using your mobile. You then ask for more complex quality assurance by the company that has bought all the primary material and processed it. You ask for a more specific quality assurance test. You document the price you pay so that you know in the end, from farmer to final consumer, this is the prices that were paid. You document issues associated with intellectual property. It's a new ingredient which is being explored. You can document it. You can document the sustainability in terms of, yes, we are now reaching a point of over-harvesting. So I think there are lots of data which can be documented in such a way. It's in essence an answer to the question we posed in the 2012 paper on value chains, how this can be done. So this is the same I just said a moment ago. You go from the initial cultivation to the consumer, so you see the same pattern, and you see the various blockchain steps, and then you see the level of complexity of the blockchain solution, not in terms of the blockchain, but in terms of the technology behind it. So for manufacturing, you must ask for the highest level of analytical precision. I would say that's something like HPLC. It can be HPLC, it can be NIR, but that's what we need to define, and that's what needs to be resolved. The concept is in a very early stage. The Chinese, just to repeat myself once more, are very active right now. But what I find very worrying, they think a lot about the technology and how to use it, but what's not being defined is the content. What are the specific data needed? Because I can document rubbish to a blockchain. It can be all completely irrelevant what I put in here, and it still is a blockchain technology. So the big challenge we face now is coming up with a meaningful and feasible way of having these data. So it's a new way, and we have just started the project at the beginning of this month, trying to see what we can do there, especially in terms of quality assurance and supply chain problems. Right. So I hope with this I've given you both a little bit of insight in the technologies you can use in a simplistic way. But also that simple doesn't mean naive or uninformative. You don't, there's a saying, don't shoot with cannons on sparrows. I think here we need to really think about a nice way of keeping sparrows happy feeding them the right way and making sure that they're healthy, sort of shooting with cannons on them, but that we need very robust tools, and if we have more complex discovery-related questions, clearly, we would use a different technology. But the other big challenge is, from my point of view, we need to think in mixtures. We need to come to grips with these complex preparations called double medicines. Right, with this, thank you again, and we'll continue later on. These are some of the people behind this studies. The main study, or the main person behind the study is really Tony Bucher, who pioneered with us a lot of the HPLC methods, and later Francesca Scotti, who also did a lot of work on this. And we did some of the work, and we published some of the work together with Kama, who I believe are the ones who are coming this afternoon.
Yes.
With their Indian representative. So they are the ones who actually helped with some of the analytical methods. But I want to be very clear, they didn't provide any equipment or anything, we bought it from them, but it still was a very good collaboration. So with this, yeah, thank you. We're ready for questions and discussions.
Any questions from you, sir?
I have a question. Sir, concerned with that SJW, there is any difference between agriculturally produced and collection in wild in terms of quality, that is the concentration of alkaloids, flavonoids, or any phytochemicals?
There is certainly good evidence that for many of these species, if you collect it in the wild, the chemistry is very different. It's obviously a huge area. It depends on the time period the plant grows, when it grows slowly or fast, it depends on the soil, annual cycle or annual differences in the rainfall, all these sort of things, some of them obviously which cannot be controlled. I think, yes, you're right, and it's one of the big areas we haven't covered. It's in essence, most of the things with the exception of the maca, which I haven't shown you, did not look at commercially grown versus harvested material. But in essence, there are important differences, and it is something well worth exploring in this context also. With maca, the problem we had, the two problems we had was one, the number of samples we had was rather limited, and this is linked to the other one. Getting access to maca samples is now pretty much limited with the whole issue of access and benefit sharing. So Peruvians are rightfully very resistant or reluctant to say that we'll just send you some samples. So we never had the chance to really explore this completely.
And one more question is, we have any international law to avoid exploitation of native plants of a country by another?
In what regard? Exploitation in what regard?
Because we have polyherbal formulation unique to India alone.
Yeah.
But as you say, a particular country is fastly growing and competing with the entire world. So,
right. But what's the
to
question?
restrict that country to exploit Indian resource. That is plants which are native to India.
Okay, right. Okay, got you now. I have very little information about the current state of inappropriate use of resources. I thought India has been much better than other countries in terms of controlling it. That's my impression, but you are the experts in this, not me. Clearly, the issue as such remains. But in my view, it's more an issue in the food nutraceutical sector and in the cosmetic sector. Pharma wouldn't touch anything until they have really very, very good agreements in place. I'm sure there are exceptions, but in general, big pharma would not want to do anything like this. So I currently have limited knowledge about specific examples.
Then one more question about SJW is whether the subspecies are compatible with one another. That is, we can raise a new variety by crossing over these subspecies to increase the concentration of the phytochemicals.
Sorry about this.
As you documented so many species of SJW, no? Subspecies. 4 subspecies.
Yeah.
It is
Well,
better.
I would say in case of some crops, the subspecies don't really make a difference. So any crossbreeding would not result in any benefits. What is clear is that the pharmaceutical producers, the high quality producers, have a very good strategy for certain high quality extracts. So they really have a very, very good methodology in place to extract these samples appropriately. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions?
Any other questions?
Thank you so much, sir, for such a nice, informative and interactive talk. Thank you so much, sir, for such a nice, motivational, inspirational, informative, and interactive session. Now, I would like to invite coordinator Professor Manish Kar, coordinator and deputy coordinator Professor Harish Dureja to kindly come over to the dais and present a plant sapling as a token of respect, as token of love, as token of regard to our resource person, Professor Michael Hamlet. Now we'll move ahead for the tea break and again assemble after 15 minutes in the same. Thank you.